Thanks for staying with us. Now, Ghanaian vegetable farmers can now rest assured that their products will have access to a much larger market. This is because the European Union has lifted its ban on the exports of 5 plant commodities from Ghana. A statement from the EU says the 5 Ghanaian plants, which are chili pepper, bottle gourds, loofah gourds, bitter gourds, and eggplants, can have duty-free and quota-free access to the EU market like any other products from Ghana. This decision follows an audit taken from the 12th to the 21st of September 2017 by the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety of the European Commission and the evolution of the numbers of import interceptions with quarantine pests notified by member states for commodities not subject to the ban. Now, the ban took a heavy toll on farmers, some of whom produce directly for the EU market. I have been joined in the studio by one of these, well, a representative of these relieved farmers, Charles Nyaba, Programs Officer for the Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana. Thank you very much for joining us there.
Thank you, Dan.
So how excited are you about the lifting of this ban?
Dan, I think my members are really excited, and before I came here, we had discussion, and they said to convey their message to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, led by the Minister, to thank them for working hard to actually lift this ban. They also want to thank Plant Protection and Regulatory Directorate, who work with the European Union to ensure that the ban is lifted.
So what did we do?
Yeah, I think there are so many things we got wrong. We think that the ban was needless. It shouldn't have happened. In the first place, before the ban and after the ban, let's look at the Ghanaian market. What's the impact on we, the local consumers? When after the ban, those who were already in production sold to the local market, of which you and I consume. What's the health implication of those products that we've consumed already? There are seasons. You go to rural communities where these produce are produced. These 5 vegetables we mentioned here, most of them are actually meant for the foreign market. But let's look at those commodities or those vegetables that are consumed by the Ghanaian population, like tomato, watermelon, garden egg, other pepper, and stuff like that.
Are you then suggesting that the conditions that these 5 commodities were under that caused them to be banned may be shared by these other very commonly consumed?
Of course. The point I'm just making is that we need to tighten our regulatory mechanisms. We shouldn't only tighten them when we have to supply to high markets like EU and other places. But the safety of Ghanaian is also important. Let me cite 2 commodities that have serious health implications, but when it comes to laws and regulations, we are not looking at them. Granite and maize. I don't know whether you heard something called aflatoxin. A research conducted by FAO and then many other people on this crop shows that there's a high level of aflatoxin contamination in maize and then granite, and we are not able to meet European standards. So all those products are consumed in Ghana. When you take granite like this, European Union standards or acceptable standard for granite for consumption is 15 parts per billion. It means contamination should not be more than 15 parts if you take the granite per billion granules. But Ghana, the research shows that the contamination level of granite is over 100 parts per billion. Now, the effect of aflatoxin is hepatitis B, most of the carcinogenic diseases, stunted growth. So if you speak to any health worker, they will tell you that the level of carcinogenic diseases among Ghanaian population is increasing because most of us consume granule soup, we consume kenke, and a whole lot of, and these crops are highly contaminated. But there is no regulations on what type of granules we put in the local market.
Wow.
So when the granules are rejected in the European market, we consume them. Ghana, we have standards. We say 20 parts per billion, but those standards are never enforced. So those are some of the problems that we have.
So it's rejected by the foreign markets. It's like forced food.
Yeah. So what we think is that for we Ghanaians, it doesn't really matter. Whatever the farmers produce, should be put in the market, we consume them. We are not thinking of our own health. But if they are producing for high-valued market, we should put in standards to ensure that they meet those standards.
How does our products become contaminated? At what point?
The contamination starts right from the point of planting to the point of harvesting, storage to market. When you take tomato, for instance, when tomatoes are not properly maintained, after production, you realize that the tomatoes get rotted on the farm before they are even harvested. Now, what some farmers are also doing is, when they see that there's a market for this week, there are certain agrochemicals that they spray on the tomatoes. Then everything become red. They harvest them and put them in the market. We all go and buy and eat. We are consuming those chemicals. So what we need to do, so even if you look, there are artificial ban on some of these products in the Ghanaian market. There are periods you go to vegetable growing areas. Most of these vegetables, tomato, garden, watermelon, are rotted on the farm. But you come to Accra and you realize that they are so expensive. You go to Accra Mall, they are importing them for Cote d'Ivoire and South Africa because they said our products are not up to standards. So what I'm thinking is that for us to be able to protect all Ghanaians, the standards should not only be limited to those products that are meant for the European market.
Okay.
We should also extend it to those products that we consume locally. Like I'm talking about the tomato and then the other stuff. It's the way forward.
So are we talking about the Ghana Standards Authority, the Food and Drugs Authority?
Yeah. Now, when you come to agro products or agriculture products, I think plant protection and regulatory have a role to play in trying to educate farmers to produce to meet standards. But they are also constrained. I think in the past we've not really done well in that area in terms of allocating budget for them to be able to play their monitoring and regulation role well. Because you go to their offices, they are sitting there, you ask them, they say, yes, the standards are there, but we cannot enforce them because we need to move to the field where these things are happening to ensure that it's done. So now that our focus is on improving agricultural productivity, we in peasant farmers always recommend that, look, there's market here. We don't need to struggle to produce to meet markets outside when our own people need it. So what we need to do is to empower the farmers, empower Plant Protection and Regulatory Directorate with resources so that they will go down to the farmers, tell them the standards that they need to produce both local and for export. When we do that, we can now come up with laws to restrict importation of the same products from our neighboring countries and then EU and other places here. It is the only way we can let this sector grow. You go to places like Nashia, you go to Hohoi, you go to Tono in other areas, they produce a lot of rice. But this rice are normally not consumed by the Ghanaian consumers because the standards are very low. But have you put any standards that before you put a local rice in the market, these are the standards it's supposed to meet? There is no such standards. So people produce.
But it's not just the markets, is it? Because there are some farmers who farm and they just consume it locally, like in a subsistence way.
Yeah, so that's another issue. Because if there's no incentive for you to add value, then nobody will see the need to do that. We try to talk to some traders and some farmers in some big food growing markets like Techiman, Edra. And then we went there, we saw maize that are rotten. And they are selling them the same price as the good maize. So if I take my maize, I put in more cost to ensure that I produce to meet quality. Then I take it to the market, I'm not getting higher prices. And then you don't add any value. And then you put it in the market, you get the same price. Next year, I'll also do the same you're doing because there's no incentive to actually increase, to improve production.
Mr. Ngaba, let me ask this finally. How widespread would you say is this danger of the aflatoxin and other contamination, if you're going to strike an average of the percentage of our produce that is contaminated?
You know, when you take a post-harvest losses, there's a research done by Africa Post-Harvest Loss Information Center, we call it AFLISH, and then AFU in 2014 and 2015. Post-harvest losses in maize in general is 35%, which means when you produce maize and you are supposed to harvest 10, you harvest 7. Then out of that, aflatoxin alone accounts for 16%. You understand? So that tells you the extent to which aflatoxin contamination is. Now there's another research conducted by 2 researchers, one in Nigeria, one in Accra. The Nigeria and then another one in the northern region. The northern region one was on granite, and then most of the granite sampled, about 75% of them were contaminated. In the Accra, the sample areas were where we process maize. That is where we used to prepare the moly and other things for the kinky. All those areas that they went, the moly that was prepared was contaminated with aflatoxin. But
would you, if you go to the northern region and you sample some and you get 75%, would it be fair to say that it's a national figure?
It is.
75% of all the groundnuts we produce in the country?
Okay, let me also put this clear. Aflatoxin goes with moisture content and temperature. There's a, maybe I don't want to use the term, there's a fungus called Aflatoxin Aspergillus flavus. That is the fungus that causes the contamination. Now, when you go to areas where temperatures are very high and the humidity is low, you don't have higher contamination. But you go to a place where temperatures are high and the humidity is also high, then you have higher contamination. So the level of contamination in Nigeria is different from the level of contamination in the north because the temperatures are different. Now, the way farmers also preserve their products in terms of storage, drying before storage, and the length of storage also determine the level of contamination.
Okay.
So I can't say that the contamination is universal.
Okay.
It depends on the agroecological zone and the kind of farming practices that farmers are putting.
From what you've seen, can you give me an average figure, finally?
In terms of percentage of contamination? Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Contamination is very high in groundnut than the maize. And then the groundnut we have between 12 to 16%. And then when we take maize, it's about more than 50%. As I mentioned. Wow. So that tells you that if you follow trend in recent times, hepatitis B cases increased. And it increased more in areas where we grow groundnut and then people consume more groundnut. If you talk to Ghana Health Service, they'll confirm that.
Right. We have a lot of confirmations to do on that. Thank you very much, Charles Nyaba, for your time and for this education. He's a programs officer with the Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana. We'll take a quick breather.